Today's topic is manuscript formatting. If you've got 5 minutes, I've got 5 tips to help you prepare a manuscript to send to an agent or an editor, or to prepare it for self-publishing. When I wrote One Year to Author last year, I gave writers a roadmap guide to getting a book published within a year. And if you know anything about the publishing industry by now, you know that in order to have a book published within a year, starting the book and having it finished and published 12 months later, you're going to be self-publishing, because the traditional publishing route does not permit for that kind of a timeline. And within that book, I wrote a chapter on formatting manuscripts. And in that chapter, I was suggesting to people how to prepare a manuscript for 2 reasons. One would be if you happen to decide that you were going to not go the self-publishing route and see it published within the year, you would format it in a specific way to send it away. Or you were going to format a manuscript in the same way in order to make it easier for you to self-publish. Either way, that's what I want to talk about today, is to help you format a manuscript so that it makes it easier for you and more accurate to send it away. One of the things you need to understand is that manuscript formatting, in spite of what you might think, is important. And it's important even as you write. You will find that if you have a standard way of formatting your manuscript as you write draft after draft, it will be a lot easier for you to self-edit or to send it to an editor if you're paying an editor to edit your work. If you format your manuscript as you go, you will find it saves you a lot of time later if you're self-publishing. And if you're sending it to an editor or a publisher or an agent, you don't want to have to reformat the whole thing. So I'm going to suggest to you some tips to get it right for ongoing writing, but also then what to do with it to tweak it to send it out. So my tip number 1 is to use a standard layout as you're writing your book. Now let's go through some of the things where you should have every single manuscript that you set up at the beginning. When you begin to write a book, you set it up this way and you just carry on writing. Because then when you come to the end of it, it will be easier to edit and it will be ready to send to an editor. So here they are. First of all, page size. Your pages should be 8.5 by 11. Doesn't matter what they're going to be in the end. Your end book might be 5 by 9 or 8 by 10. Doesn't matter. Right now, it should be 8.5 by 11 inches. Use standard margins, 1 inch all around. Font type. Choose a serif font. Choose either Times Roman or Cambria as the regular font that you're going to use. This is not the font that the book will be published in the end, but use one of these fonts, 11 or 12 point, which makes it easier to read. And I will point out to you, if you do it in a sans serif font like Arial, it will be much more difficult to read, not only for other people, but for you. You're the one who has to go through and do some self-editing, so make it easier on yourself. Use a serif font. You want to double space it. Gosh, I can't tell you how many times I've seen people post things online and ask for feedback, and it's single spaced. I wouldn't even read something that's single spaced when you're trying to edit something. So make sure that your work is double spaced. 1.5 sometimes, but mostly double spaced. As for alignment, make sure that it is aligned flush left. Do not fully justify your text. If you fully justify your text, you're going to get spacing that's funky sometimes, and it makes it much more difficult to read. So for improved readability, right from the start, make sure your text is left justified. Now, if you're older than a certain age, you may have been used to putting in double spaces after a period. Use a single space after a period, always. To begin a new chapter, use a page break. Don't just tab down or return down until you get on another page. Use a page break. Number your pages. This is really important for you even as you go along, especially if you're going to print them out. What happens if you drop them on the floor? Your pages need to have numbers on them. Now, that was all part of tip number 1 in having a standard format. Now let's move on to the rest of the tips if you're going to prepare a manuscript to send to an editor of any sort, to a publisher, or to an agent. So my tip number 2 is to follow the instructions provided by the agent or the publisher. Most publishers or agents have specific instructions. If they don't have any, just use the ones that I've already given you in tip number 1. But if they have specific requirements, follow those. Add those on to your original manuscript. Tip number 3, your manuscript needs a title page. It should have this as a working manuscript as well. And this is what your title page should look like. Title centered in the middle of the page, subtitle under that if there is one, centered in the page your name, and down in the right hand corner should be all your contact information. That's it. Tip number 4, name your electronic file appropriately. This probably has never occurred to you if you've never sent something out to someone before. And it's something that I learned very quickly as a university professor. If my students sent me papers and I had not provided them with guidelines on how to name a file, I was in a big mess with trying to save files and then mark them. Same thing with editors and agents. They get a lot of material, they get a lot of attachments. Name that file this way. Your last name, your first name, the name of the book, and the date. And if you do that with your last name first, the agent is going to be able to find your document in a list of documents that they've downloaded. Just consider them for a moment. If you think about them and how they're going to find this among all of the hundreds of things that they get sent on a weekly basis, make yours the easiest one to find. And tip number 5 is send just the manuscript. Now that may sound strange to you, but here's what I mean. Unless you're writing nonfiction, don't send a table of contents. Just send the manuscript. Don't include your dedication unless it's really important. I wrote a novel last year that was dedicated to my mother, who was 100 years old, and it happened to be about somebody turning 100 years old. That was kind of germane in a way. But generally speaking, you don't include things like that. Don't include in the manuscript a list of your other publications. Don't include any bio in it. There are spaces for those things to go. They don't go in your manuscript. If you're writing nonfiction, then you do need to include your table of contents. But apart from that, it's just the manuscript. That's all. That's all that goes in the document. So, if you're planning to pursue a traditional publishing contract, using these guidelines and these tips will help you to have a manuscript that's ready to go, just ready to send to an agent or a publisher or an editor. However, if you're planning on publishing it yourself, you might want to get yourself a copy of 1 Year to Author for lots of guidance on what to do next. Happy writing. Subscribe to Write, Fix, Repeat, and maybe I can help you improve your writing knowledge and skills. 5 tips at a time.